Welcome to the Laugh Support Podcast with your hosts, Michele VanDusen and June Colson. A couple of clean comedians here to support each other and others through comedy's wacky and winding roads. They'll talk about highs and lows and some traumatizing shows. So get ready, get set, let's go! Welcome to the Laugh Support Podcast New Year's edition, brought to you by the Hot Breath Comedy Network. I'm your host, June Colson, here with my best friend, Michele, with 1L VanDusen. What's up,
Hello.
Michele VanDusen?
Oh, not too much. I'm really excited. Looking forward to this new year. Things are going to be great. It's going to be my year. It's going to be my year. Not like 2020. This year is going to be my year.
Listen, okay, so Jason and I, we never celebrate. We have no friends. New Year's really identifies that we have no friends. We're like not invited to 10,000 parties. Usually we sit around and are like, I don't know, what are you going to do? I don't know, what are you going to do? And in 2019 into 2020, last minute, he calls me and he says, I got a great deal on a hotel right down from the free concert in Nashville. And this is huge.
Ooh.
This is huge.
Yeah.
And he said, let's go. And I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's great. So we hop in the car and we take off and we go to this concert in Nashville. There's like 20,000 people there. It's Stevie Nicks. And, you know, I'm not like a huge I don't know all the country people. It's the Australian guy who's married to Nicole Kidman, that cat.
Crocodile
Adorable.
Dundee.
Yeah, Crocodile Dundee.
No?
He was on stage. No. And so anyway, it was just amazing. It was like the most fun, Jason. It was just us. We were grown-ups. We had grown-up time. And I like have video of us at the concert. And I'm like, 2020 is going to be the best ever. Yeah. I'm like, you know what? We're never celebrating a new year ever again. Like ever again. What do you do? What do you do to celebrate?
Every year, our friends invite us to their house for their New Year's Eve party.
Okay, so now you're just rubbing it in. You're like, you start off with, I have friends, June. Okay, fine.
Yeah, but hang on. Here's the kicker. Every year, I'm like, yeah, we can't make it because I have really important things. We put together a puzzle every year.
Oh, okay. Is this a throwback to where you did comedy?
Yes, it is.
You did comedy at Mount Rushmore in front of 4 presidents. I told you that's what you need to have on your website. You know, Michele VanDusen has performed for 4 different presidents. They're all dead and they were in stone, but it counts. I would put that on there.
But we bought that then, and we haven't opened it yet because saving it for this New Year's Eve. So
nice.
Yep,
well, okay. So today, Michele, I'm so hype about the guest that we have today, but I'm a little intimidated because he has one of the best podcasts ever.
Yes.
Like one of the best podcasts ever. I think he's over 253, maybe 54 episodes. I literally consumed at the beginning of like trying to figure out the whole comedy thing. I consumed everything that I possibly could of his podcast. So right now, our little podcast, I feel like we're like, hey, David Copperfield, want to see a card trick, David Copperfield? Like we are in front of the best with our little card trick, but that's all right. He agreed to come because he's a fabulous human being. So Michele, tell us all about who is on the show today.
Okay, so Rik Roberts is a Nashville, Tennessee-based comedian and a speaker who focuses on providing 100% clean comedy and creative keynotes to groups who need a fun and engaging program. He's been featured on Dry Bar Comedy, Pure Flix Comedy All-Stars, and co-stars in the movie Mayberry Man. And awesome. Here's the thing. He's the host of the Amazing School of Laughs podcast, which you mentioned. So let's welcome to the Laugh Support podcast, Rik Roberts.
All right.
Clap, 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 clap.
Hey, everybody.
There he is. Rik, oh my gosh, we're so excited that you're here. You are so electric that literally when we tried to start this podcast, you shut down the entire electric grid in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
It could be the electric heating pad I have plugged in behind me.
Is that it? Is that what it is?
One too many things.
One too many things. Well, hey, we are so excited to have you on our podcast. We talked to you a little bit at the beginning. It's called Laugh Support. And, you know, as we've done this show, we've had people who are like, I had nobody. and that's okay. And then there's some people who have a list of people, and we just kind of want to know, Rick, you've had a really successful career, and we're curious about who has been your laugh support from the beginning through now.
Well, it's been such a long time that a lot of the people that I started with aren't doing comedy anymore. But I would say when I first started, the very first night I did comedy, there were two comics who came out to the parking lot after I ran out the door after doing my set and said, "Hey, man, you got to come back in. There's a bunch of comedy. It's going to go on for like 2.5 hours. The show just gets better as it gets going." And that was Mark Edward Hoyk and Miguel Baldoni. They're both very funny guys. They don't do comedy full time, but they're both funny and smart. I mean, they were super smart guys. And, I'd say after 2 or 3 more months of going to these open mics, I said, these guys are cool. I'll move in with them. So I had 2 roommates for the first 8 years of my comedy career that were both pursuing comedy and liked what I did. And I liked what they did. And we would sit around. I mean, we had stretches of time where we sit around and write for 5-6 hours and just kick ideas around and hang out. So I would say early on, those were the 2 guys that, saw my very first open mic and said, "Hey, this guy's got something, I guess. Let's hang out with him." And I thought the same thing about those 2 guys.
Oh, wow. So I imagine that was probably a really fancy bachelor pad. 3 dude comedians just trying to get started. It
You
was
want to hear
probably
how bad it was? So it was a basement and then 2 floors and an attic. And so in the basement, we collected aluminum cans so we could pay rent.
ooh.
And at one point, we had more ants in the house than probably the entire ant colony of the United States. We were just throwing Mountain Dew cans down the stairs, and then one day we're like, "Uh-oh, we got an ant problem down here." And then I lived in the attic with a bat, and eventually,
Like a ball bat for safety, or like
no,
a bat,
like one
like
that
a
flew up.
bat?
He would come out of the closet and hover around, and one day it just got to be too much. He woke me up at 3 in the morning. So I had to get a hamper, and my 2 roommates came up, and we trapped him and took him outside. It was freezing. We threw him outside, and about 10 minutes later, our neighbors knocked on the door, and they were these real I don't know what the right word is for them, but they thought they were wildlife experts, and they yelled at us for throwing the bat outside because it could kill that poor bat. And I'm like, yeah, as we know now, that bat could kill me.
Yes, yes. So you said the bat woke you up at 3 in the morning. I imagine him with like like, "Rick, get up. You got a cigarette, man? It's
Well, I
3
did.
a.m. I've been out all night."
It was funny. I got up to smoke. I smoked so much back then that I'd wake up twice a night to smoke a cigarette just so I could get back to sleep. And that's when I saw the bat, and I'm like, I can't fall back asleep knowing that thing is looking at me right now. I'm like, how many veins do I have in my neck? How close is it to Halloween?
Listen, I was running on the trail behind our house not long ago, and I was talking to Michele and Rhonda Corey on Marco, and the sun was going down, and they were doing the bird abatement, and the cannons were going off, and as I was running, a bat came out of a tree and got stuck in my hair and was flapping above me. And so I may have said a few words as I was talking to Michele, and listen, Rick, she called me out the next day on Facebook. She was like, "Somebody needs to put money in the jar." That's what true friends are for. Okay, so you started out and you had these guys. You said you ran out of that first set. So did you plan on just running away? Had these guys not showed up and encouraged you, or
Yeah,
or do you think you would have gone back?
it's hard to say. That first one, I didn't know it was a comedy night. So when I got done with my 3 songs, the MC told me that it was a comedy night, not a night for guitar players to come and play Bridge Over Troubled Water. So I was pretty horrified that I was in the wrong spot. So I ran out. I don't know if I would have thought about coming back and trying comedy because I didn't stick around for any comedy. I was the first person up in this months-long contest. There was probably 25 comics there that night. But the MC was not a funny guy. Didn't do any comedy. He just went up there in an old tuxedo, just introduced the first comic, which was me. But he didn't say comic. He just said our first performer. So anyway, I didn't know it was a comedy night. I probably would not have known had he not said that. And I don't know if I'd gone back either. So I always think about, way back then, the people that God puts in your life to kind of guide you the right way, and at least for that period of time, those were those 2 guys that helped me out.
So you played a Bridge Over Troubled Water. That was the song you played at the comedy
I let
show.
off with that. And then after nobody responded, I thought, they don't want to hear Simon and Garfunkel at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night at a bar. Maybe Born to Be Wild is a better choice. And I played that. And I thought I played it about the best I ever played it, just no response. And then I looked at my watch. I'm like, well, I got one more song. What do you guys want to hear? And they yelled a bunch of words that would make me put coins in the jar. And at the end of that sentence, they said something funny. And I had written a couple funny songs in college and played one of those, but I still didn't know why they wanted to hear something funny. I just played it and got off stage. And turned out when I came back in at the end of the night, I got like 4 votes as the funniest person that night out of, 600 votes or whatever it was. So I got invited to come back the next week. And that's when I started thinking I should try to write some jokes now that I know this is a comedy night, and have fun with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Michelle, have you ever just shown up and accidentally performed somewhere that they weren't expecting you?
Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore. Yeah, Rick. We have a couple episodes where we talk about Michelle will just randomly tell them what you did at Mount Rushmore, Michelle.
I just standing there in front of the president's head. There was a crowd, looking at the rock. And so I said, hey, you guys want to hear some comedy? And they're like, yeah. So I just did a set there. And they're like, oh, that was fun. Thanks. And then everybody went on their way. And then we traveled. And as we continue to travel, whatever national monument I stopped at, I'm like, hey, you want to hear some comedy? They're like, yeah. I'm like, all right. So I did my set through 12 states.
Oh, that's awesome.
Isn't that cool? I think
that's really cool.
It's definitely Michelle is definitely one of the most creative comedians that I've ever met, and probably one of the most bold. You're gonna get her comedy whether you want it or not.
Just creative or desperate. I think it's either way.
She even had people on a train at one point. There was a train ride, and she
was
like,
great.
"Oh,
they can't
welcome to the train." They literally were like a captive audience. It was awesome. But yeah, okay. So
throw Mama from the train, throw Michelle.
Yeah, they wanted to throw Michelle from the train. No, okay. So we talk about early on you had the last support of these guys that just was kind of a random meeting. And then, man, you've had such a long and fantastic career. So today, who would you say are typically on the, most often are the people that are your laugh support? Because I know you spend time with quite a bit of other comedians, especially in the Nashville area.
Yeah, I'd say Johnny W. and Brian Bates, we get together probably at least every 6 weeks, have lunch, kick some stuff around, just talk about life. And, they're both comedy students of mine. So it's kind of fun to see that they're out there doing it and they're full time. So I always feel like getting together with them is a good kind of shot in the arm just to see what's going on and kind of keep my enthusiasm up for comedy as well. Cause you can be only so enthusiastic about your own career, but it's fun to see other people that you like doing well and hanging out with them.
Yeah, that's really cool. So what an interesting dynamic that they literally learned from you. And
I think they both knew, Brian was a great writer from writing for TV news, and Johnny had already done a little bit of comedy before we first all met. But, the thing with them is they stuck with it. And I always want to stick with people who stick with it. It's hard to know who those people are going to be early on. But once you see that, I mean, you two are both good examples of people that just stick with it. Comedy's not the easiest thing to do. And there's, you can get, the kids use the term jelly. You can get a little jelly sometimes when you see other people doing some gigs and stuff that you're not doing. But the reality is that everybody's got their own path, and you'll do things nobody else does. They'll do things that you'll never do. Mm-hmm. The key is that we're just doing things and bringing some clean comedy to people. That's the key to all of it.
Yeah. And listen, Michelle, I've tried to consume almost everything that Rick's put out there. I truly believe that not only are you a gifted comedian and actor, as we talked about earlier, the Mayberry Man, that movie, I was telling Rick before we started recording how impressed my husband and I were in every scene that Rick was in. He was fantastic. But on top of that, you're truly a great teacher. And I've taken the writer's class and the performance class and the business, that you offered there. You were the first person who gave me an opportunity to stand on stage at a comedy club, and of all comedy clubs, Zanies in Nashville, which is,
nice.
We know that's a really special venue there. And so I get to, when people are like, have you ever performed at Zanies? I get to say yes. And I don't mention I paid to do it, I just go, yeah, sure. Yeah. Just a little thing. I just did a little thing there one time. But but you're an excellent teacher, as far as laugh support goes. You really, between your podcast and and the lessons are so well done. And when I came to your class, I can tell you this much, Michele, I didn't feel less than. I didn't feel like Rik was judgmental of anybody in the class, no matter what they were putting out there. He truly invests in people. And tell us how, how did that even start, that you started, this educational program in comedy?
Yeah, it was interesting. When I moved to Nashville in '99, the local comedy scene was pretty strong. There was a ton of comics, and they had open mics at Zany's. But the guy that ran Zany's, Brian, he said, you know what? We've got the open mics going on, and like half of them are filthy, and people are getting up and leaving before the headliner or whoever was booked for the night comes up. He goes, could you teach some comedy classes and at least get these guys to get to a punchline quicker? He wasn't as concerned as much about how clean they were, but they were just like not funny and didn't have a structure to it. And I just told him, I don't know if you can teach comedy, because I'd always heard you either had it or you didn't,
Right.
And so I kind of bought into that. But he gave me the best piece of advice ever. He goes, why don't you just watch your act, get out one of your shows where you got on at that time video, and every time the audience laughs, just pause it and write down. You can write down the punchline, but write down why they laughed. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that'd be cool. And he goes, then take those things and teach other people those things. And I think that'll help them out. And so I was a little skeptical at first, but I was curious about the idea of watching my set and actually writing down, not just the punchline, but why the punchline made them laugh. And that's kind of when I came up with my list of, 15, 20 things that trigger a laugh. And then I looked at the jokes that didn't get a laugh and realized they didn't have any of those 15 or 20 techniques in there. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go rewrite those jokes and add these things that trigger a laugh, and maybe 2 or 3 of these things that trigger a laugh in the punchline, so that it's got a better shot. And it was amazing just to see the transformation in my, then I was featuring and headlining, but probably more featuring. And by the end of the next year, I was headlining everywhere because I'd fixed all those jokes. My whole hour was solid, instead of having like some really good peaks and then some mediocre spots. And so then I took that and started teaching the class at Zany's. And it was actually Brian Bates' class that was the first graduation show at Zany's.
Oh,
I was doing them at like Bongo Java and different coffee houses. And then I remember watching his class go up, and there's probably 12 in that class. And they all did so good that I just felt this voice saying, this is a show you can see at Zany's. This is better than any open mic they have over there, even though these people are brand new. So that's when I talked to Brian and said, hey, can I bring these guys over? And, you guys get the door. I just want the chance to put them on the stage and get some experience. And, for a long time there, we just had a good run of classes and graduation shows and people doing it. So that was, I hadn't planned on teaching a class, but he kind of put that bug in my ear. And once I saw that it worked, it also held me more accountable. Every time I taught the class, I would take the class. So I wrote new jokes every time. I come out with 5 or 6 new minutes. And,
nice.
I'd learn things in between. And so I'd add those things to the classes. So, if you came back 6 months after you took the last writing class, there's probably a couple of new things that I learned in those 6 months that I put in there. So it just kind of keeps evolving. It's comedy's a never ending Rubik's Cube that you never get all the sides lined up for more than a second before it's jumbled up again. But it's fun to figure out different processes that make it work better.
One of the big pieces of advice, Michele, that Rik gave me, that has helped me survive Michele's critique is that he literally, and I've shared this with other comedians that are starting out, is, he said to treat your material like a frog and not a baby. If you're working with people and you're trying to get it better, if you hand them your baby and they dissect it, you're wounded. Yeah, you go to jail, right? You internalize that and you take that so personal. And he said to treat it like a frog. If you're allowing someone to, pick it apart and find the best pieces of it, you got to have a frog and not a baby. And Michele, how many frogs have I handed you?
A lot of toads. Enough
that she wishes she could croak after. Oh, there it is. Look at it. Look, right there on the spot.
You jumped right on it. You leaped in there.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that Rik had in his course that I really gave me comfort starting out was literally just definitions. Like, I
Hmm.
mean, he really kept it as like he knew there was going to be some people in there that was way below what they knew, but also he went to like the newest person walking in the room could feel comforted because I mean, it was a list of like what is a green room and what's a feature act and just terminology that's used in comedy that if you're first starting out and someone says it to you, like right now I'm doing some things in acting and I'm having to ask Michele because she's done acting before and I'm like what does this mean and what does that mean? But to have somebody who it just doesn't make you feel less than is huge.
Hmm.
And that's definitely a gift that, that
That
you
Rick
give.
has. Yeah.
Yeah. That you give people who are starting out for
Yeah,
sure. So yeah, go ahead.
well, I just think a lot of people get caught up on the levels of comedy and who's doing
Hmm.
this and who's doing
Hmm.
that. They look at it vertically. And to me, it's just a horizon thing. Some people have been on the journey for 10 years or 30, but we're still on the same plane. We're all still working with an audience and we're all still telling jokes.
Hmm.
So, how do I get the person last in line a little bit closer to the middle, to the front of the line, not above somebody else or below somebody else, but just along with the rest of us? Because, they have that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with many. And so I think, and I see it with the people who've taken my class and just different comedy groups around the country that, just they associate each other and they kind of move each other down the road. They don't let anybody get too far behind. They drag that person along with them in tough times. And that's really what, any journey is, especially artistically. It's easy to look at a corporate situation and go, oh, that person's a CEO talent. That person's a data entry person or whatever. But in comedy and art and everything, it's just a journey. And sometimes you'll find that one thing that moves you way faster down the line than you would have. Sometimes you can find it on your own, but if you're hanging out with other people that are pursuing the stuff you're pursuing, more likely you're going to find some of those things that kind of quicken up the pace.
That's really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. So has there ever been a time you felt that you didn't have support around you? Because we know, I mean, comedy can be a very lonely journey.
Oh,
Um,
sure. I
yeah.
mean,
So tell us about that.
especially in comedy clubs, it was so competitive and brutal. I mean,
Mm.
I can give you 3 examples, probably 100, where the other comics were just sabotaging my show.
Ooh.
One that comes to mind is I was in Madison, Wisconsin, and the comic I was working with, I was featuring, he was headlining. And in between shows, I went up and tuned up my guitar to make sure it was ready for the next set. Went across the street to have a slice of pizza and came in. Show kicked off. The MC brought me up on stage, and my guitar had been thrown on the floor. All the strings were untuned. And so I went to get it. I
Oh.
realized this idiot had tried to sabotage my act. So, you know, just flat out, like right in the middle of the show. I had more material, so I said, "Oh, well, let's get back to the jokes." But yeah, I had to confront him after the show. I'm like, "Are you that insecure that you have to untune my guitar strings and throw it on the floor?" It wasn't like I was blowing him off the stage or anything. He just didn't like me. So, I mean, that happened. There was, times where I'm getting videotapes of my set, and the other comic just walks in front and stands in front of my camera for the next 20 minutes, so I
Mm.
don't get any of the footage from it. Uh,
Wow.
Comics not picking me up for radio when they were supposed to pick me up, so it looks like I missed the radio in the morning. All kinds of stuff like that. But there's less of that now. I'm pretty much a one-man band. I go do my own stuff.
Mm.
But when I was working with other comics, a lot of times, not a lot, it wasn't a majority of the time, but there was plenty of times where they were like, this guy's, you know, whatever. I don't know why they felt threatened. But I
Yeah.
think it's just the mindset in comedy clubs. They're trying to take my spot or whatever. Whereas when you're doing corporate events or church events, it's like, oh, he showed up to help us out. It's a whole different vibe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Michelle, have you been sabotaged? I know that time that you were in the Miss America pageant where the girl, she glued your costume, your dress bag shut where you couldn't get into your formal gown. But how about comedy? Have you had have you had any sabotage moments in comedy?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with no, absolutely not. I've never had to deal with that. I mean, the only thing that really as a woman that we deal with is the fact you're a woman. It's like,
Mm,
oh, we'll have a show. It's all men, 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 men. Now one token woman. It's like, but there's
yeah.
more funny women out there than just one. So like
Mhm.
that's the only thing that it would be. There has been a couple of shows. They're like, yeah, we can't have you on because you're too clean. I'm like, okay. So no real
Yeah.
sabotage. Just yeah, you're too good for us, like, and not like you're a better comic, but it's just too clean, dirty. So I just don't fit in certain spots.
Got
So
it.
yeah,
Got it.
so
Yeah,
no,
yeah. I can see that. Well, listen, we're heading into the new year, right?
yeah,
And Rick, you know, like I said, you've given me so much advice over the years. I definitely want to encourage our listeners to, if they're interested in comedy or not even to be a comedian, if you're just interested in comedy in general, the School of Laughs podcast is amazing. I was telling Michelle earlier, it actually the episode that you did with Rhonda Corey. This was before Rhonda and I were friends. We're now Michelle, Rhonda, and I are basically, we're the Three Stooges. We're together all the time. But I didn't really know Rhonda. And the episode that you did with her, winning the Clean Comedy Challenge, I remember I was running through my neighborhood, just listening to it in the earbuds, and I was thinking, why, like, it was so reflective of the journey I was on. And a lot of times you hear success in somebody that you think like, well, I'm too old, or I'm too, this, or, whatever, um, false voices have gotten in your head. But then you hear somebody on the podcast, and I heard Rhonda and her journey. And actually, because of that episode, it gave me enough courage to even try out or attempt to do the Clean Comedy Challenge, which then manifested in the same situation as Rhonda. I ended up, winning that event, but I wouldn't have even gone on there and done that had it not been for the episode that you did there. But even before I was actually doing stand up, I listened to your podcast all the time, and you have interesting people. And I believe that there's a lot of stuff that applies to in comedy that can apply to all kinds of jobs and real world situations. So I definitely encourage our audiences to listen to Rick's podcast, because it's phenomenal. But going into the new year, is there any thoughts that you have maybe personally in your comedy, or any suggestions you have for comedians that might help them be more successful in 2022 than they were in 2021?
Yeah, good timing on this actually, because the next episode that comes out on the 15th of December is the annual goals tracker worksheet episode, which covers about 40 different areas that you could choose. You don't have to choose all 40, but it gives you 40 things where you could look at what you currently have, whether it's how much material you have, how many times a week you're writing, how many new jokes you get on stage, how many videos you've created, how many subscribers you've got, all these different things. And then look at what you want to have by the end of next year. And it gives you a little chart where you can kind of divide those things into weeks or months and start to break down your goals in actionable ways so that you can take control of what you can control. A lot of comedy and a lot of art, you're at the whim of a lot of different people and places and things. A lot of it's out of your control. But creating your content, that's all on you. And so this next episode that comes out has a ton of different things and little side stories in between the different areas to get you motivated. Outside of that, I would say, look at the new year as a way to kind of recalibrate and focus at least on one thing that's driving you crazy and finishing it. Whether that's a book you've been trying to write for 2 or 3 years, or whether it's your next 30 minutes or 40-minute special or whatever it might be. But at least have one goal and hold yourself accountable to that. Because if you don't, you can't measure what you don't do. So do something, measure it. And again, it is kind of like it's a frog, not a baby. If you don't reach your goal 1 month, hey, you just put that frog back on the dissecting chart and try to chop it up, put it in a blender, whatever you got to do to get that thing torn apart and built back together. But the new year, it's weird that we sometimes wait for the new year to start new goals and things like that, but it's on us right now. So let's just take advantage of it and see what you can do. Another thing I would say too is make an effort to get outside of you and see if you can focus. I have in my house when I'm home on Mondays, I kind of start the week with an attitude of gratitude. I like that phrase, but I write thank you notes to everybody who hired me the previous week. If I didn't have a gig the previous week, I reach out by email or a Facebook Messenger or something like that to somebody that's in my circle and just, encourage them or ask them if there's anything they need help on. But every Monday I try to start off, outside of doing something for me, doing something for somebody else or thanking somebody else for something. And that usually sets the tone pretty nice for a Monday, which can usually be a pretty grumpy day around the house.
Yes, that's awesome. I love Michelle. I love what he said several years ago. I heard somebody say, resolutions are nothing without a plan. It's nothing without a plan, because people will be like, I'm going to lose 20 pounds this year. Okay, then how? How are you going to do it? Right?
Invest in the London Stock Exchange. Oh,
yes.
Right.
Is that
I'm trying to lose 50 euros right now.
yes, there it is. But I love it. So Rick's next episode, not only is like, hey, think of things you can do, but also he physically is giving you something that you can print and look at, and something concrete to make a plan, and just not have an idea of something to do, but actually steps, to take action to get that done. So that's really awesome.
Yeah,
Michelle, go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you
PDF
fail
is
to
up on the
plan,
website already. So if people want to just go
nice.
to schoollaughs.com and go to the goals tracker tab and hit that, they can download it. And there's 6 or 7 other free resources there. And they all, I think, apply to any kind of art form. They're specific to comedy, but you can easily write new jokes to paint a new painting or create more or whatever.
Awesome.
If you're starting out, Rick, which would be the first or the best class to start with from your site?
Yeah, I would say 2 things to do is, one, go to that same tab, and there's a 20-page PDF called Getting Started in Comedy. And it just kind of addresses all the things that you're kind of thinking. Like if your friends are saying you should try comedy, well, that's them telling you to go do something, but how do you do it? And so the 20 pages kind of walks you quickly through making decisions about how you should maybe go about it. And then as far as classes, there's an online writing class. It's the same. It's actually more in depth than the live class that I teach. You'll walk out of that with material from, even if you're brand new to comedy, there's a 114-page workbook in there that gives you assignments. And there's different levels of that. The least level, you can just take it on your own. But if you want guidance and feedback, there's also 2 other versions of that same class with extra feedback. So I would do that, but I would check out some of the podcasts first. You can use the search tool to search any topic. I'm sure I know we've had multiple comics on there like, am I too old to start comedy? Well, if you type that in, you'll pull up 6 episodes in a blog post that tell you what they thought and what their story was and how they overcame that. So any questions you have, you could probably search that website for months, if not a year on end, and get all your questions without even taking a class. But if you want one, they're in there, and there's Christmas specials going on now, half off. So if anybody wants to jump in that, now's a good time.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's a game changer. It's definitely a game changer. I mean, every time I sit down and write, I'm using something that I learned from Rik Roberts every time I sit down and write. So you have definitely, you've been life support to me, Rick, and I so appreciate that. We are, just like I said, honored that you've been on here. Guys, definitely check out Rik Roberts on Facebook, comedian Rik Roberts. You can find him on YouTube, Rick YouTube video, Twitter, Rik Roberts. And as we said, his School of Laughs podcast, and all the tools that you can find through that. Just absolute honor. It's been great to have you on today, hadn't it, Michelle?
Yes, thank you. It is. And also make sure that when you're looking up Rick, it's RIK.
Yes.
ROBERTS. It's Rick, RIK, not RICK.
Yeah,
So,
there is a very unfunny, I shouldn't say that, but there's a couple of videos up of a guy named Rik Roberts spelled the other way. And I always wondered, did people search him and go, not ready to hire this dude yet?
Yeah. Yeah. How many jobs may have, may have missed because of that one? Yeah. There's like this girl, June Colson, out there too, that if you see her video and it's not funny, it's not me. It's not. That's not me.
Right. There's another Michele VanDusen with 1L, but she's a photographer. So if you see some pictures that are in focus, that's her. And if you see the blurry ones, that's me.
This is true. This is true. All right, guys. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Laugh Support Podcast. Our thanks to Rik Roberts. And actually, this closes out our very first season of the Laugh Support Podcast. So thank you to everybody who has been on the show this year, who has been our Laugh Support. And we look forward to a great year in 2022. That's it for me. Jesus and Junebug loves you. And tell them goodbye, Michelle.
Goodbye, Michelle.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks.